טוב, אנחנו בעצם לא בהפסקה, אנחנו ממשיכים מיד בתוכנית. הדובר הבא שלנו, אני רוצה להציג אותו, הוא חבר והוא שותף לדרך. אני אציג אותו באנגלית משום שהוא ידבר באנגלית. פרופסור בועז גנור. Professor Boaz Ganor is the Dean and the Ronald Lauder Chair for Counterterrorism at the Lauder School of Government, Diplomacy and Strategy, as well as the founder and the executive director of the International Institute for Counterterrorism here at IDC. He is a member of the International Advisory Council of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research in Singapore and the co-founder of the International Center for the Study of Radicalization and Political Violence. He also served as a member of the International Advisory Team to the Manhattan Institute to the New York Police Department. Professor Ganor has given briefings and testimonies to the United Nations Counterterrorism Executive Directorate, the Australian Parliament, the United States Congress, the US Army, the FBI, the US Department of Homeland Security, as well as numerous intelligence, security, and police services throughout the world. Boaz Ganor, bevakasha.
Thank you, Ronen. Actually, you gave me only 15 minutes, so you should have shortened my bio, so I will have enough time to speak. It takes me more than that to start my engines. I've chosen the subject of the title of the art of counterterrorism in order to make the statement that I want to give in this specific Hartzlia conference. Unfortunately, terrorism is spreading all over the world. There is no one state today which is immune to the threat of terrorism. Organized terrorism, personal initiative attacks, local initiative attacks, but it seems that we are now in the midst of an evolution within the phenomenon of terrorism. And I would like actually to elaborate on that. When I say the art of counterterrorism, I really mean it. I do believe that anyone who's dealing with counterterrorism has to be an artist that would find the right balances between conflicting goals, between conflicting challenges, and a very complex subject matter. So I would like to share with you some of those challenges that the artist of counterterrorism needs to take under consideration. The first challenge is to identify the enemy. Who is the enemy? Well, when I say who is the enemy, actually there are two sub-questions here. What is terrorism, and who are the perpetrators of terrorism? As for the first question, I don't want to take too much time because this is something that I've written a lot about the definition of terrorism. Unlike most of the scholars in the world today, most of the decision makers, I tend to believe that there is a need and it's possible to reach an international acceptable definition of the term terrorism. You might be surprised, but there is no such definition which is accepted worldwide. Actually, the opposite. Most of the decision makers around the world believe that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Well, I would say this is nonsense. In Israel, we are using another term starting with a B. The definition of terrorism that I use is the following one. Terrorism is the deliberate use of violence aimed against civilians in order to achieve political ends, period. Regardless who is doing that, regardless how legitimate or illegitimate the target it is trying to achieve, once it deliberately attacks civilians, that's a terrorist. I won't get too deep into that because I want to focus on the second question. And the second question is, who are the perpetrators of terrorism? And I would like to suggest the classification of three groups of perpetrators. The first group of perpetrators are the lone wolves, those that conduct a personal initiative attack. Unfortunately, this is a spreading phenomenon. It's spreading like an epidemic. We see it in Israel in the last wave of lone wolves attacks the last 6 months. We see it all over the world, and I'll show you this in a moment. Two examples that I brought in my presentation today: Mahdi Namush, the lone attacker that attacked the Jewish Museum in Brussels, and the lone wolf that attacked the Jewish school in Toulouse, Muhammad Mra. The second group of perpetrators are those that we refer to them as the local initiative attack. The local initiative attack being conducted by an independent network. Usually when we speak about this independent network, you see some personal connection between the perpetrators. The perpetrators are usually 2, 3, or maybe 4 perpetrators, and this is a group of lone wolves, if you wish. One example would be the 2 cousins that conduct the attack in Tel Aviv last week, the San Bernardino attack in California, a husband and a wife, the Kawashi brothers that conduct the attack in Charlie Hebdo, and so on and so forth. This is a different ballgame. The common denominator between the lone wolf and the local independent network is that although in both cases, in most cases they are being inspired by a terrorist organization, they do not have any operational connection to a terrorist organization. There is no terrorist organization out there that recruited them, that trained them, and mainly that sent them to their mission and give them any support to this attack. But in many cases, they are being inspired by ISIS, by Al-Qaeda, by other organizations, and maybe even see themselves as part of the organization, although officially they have never been accepted to that. The third type of attacks are the organized attacks. The organized attacks is the Paris November 13 type of an attack, or the last attack in Brussels, or 9/11 if you wish. In an organized attack, you have an organization that initiates the attack, plan the attack, prepare the attack, and execute the attack. It might execute the attack either by using infiltrating cell, foreign fighters that come from Syria and infiltrate to that country, or it might be a situation in which it's using a sleeper cell. Those are elements that homegrown terrorists that are subordinated to his operational command, and one day he decides to activate them. When I compare the personal initiative attack to the organized attacks, I have good news for you and I have bad news for you. The good news is that usually the personal initiative attack, the lone wolf attack, is very limited in the number of casualties that it's causing. That's good news because how many people usually they kill? 2 people, 3 people, without underestimating, of course, the suffering of every victim and the family of the victims altogether. You cannot compare that to the Brussels attack or to the Paris attack or 9/11, of course, in that respect. That's the good news. The bad news is that we used to say that until recently, these types of attacks, the personal initiative attacks, the lone wolf attack, cannot be prevented. And you know why it cannot be prevented? Because you don't have intelligence on a sick mind of one person. When one person in his sick mind makes the decision to conduct the attack, plan the attack, and execute the attack, and do not share this information with anybody else, then the intelligence cannot infiltrate to this information because the intelligence relies on communication. Human sources intelligence, communication intelligence rely on the fact that one person tell to another person what are the intentions of his or other people altogether. In the personal initiative attack, you cannot do that. But in the last wave of terrorism, we have found something that actually suggests that maybe there is a compensation of lack of intelligence. I will reveal that in a moment. The second pillar of the art of counterterrorism is the rationale of the terrorist. Now, it might come as a surprise to you, my friends, because in this room we have Westerners coming from Western countries. I would like to argue that in general, and I'm generalizing here, that in general, terrorists are rational actors. Definitely the heads of terrorist organizations, but also even the perpetrator themselves, even the suicide attacker is a rational actor. Now, what's a rational act? How can we say that they are conducting a rational decision-making process? A rational decision-making process is a process in which one is calculating different alternatives, calculating the costs and benefits of different alternatives, and choosing the alternative which he believes is more beneficial to achieve his goal and not more costly. That's a rational behavior. That's exactly what the terrorists are doing. But the terrorist has a different calculus of costs and benefits compared to the Western decision makers. And therefore, when I'm talking about the art of counterterrorism, I'm talking about the art of being able to understand the mind of the terrorist, the calculation of the terrorist of costs and benefits. Understand the calculus in the eye of the beholder, in the eyes of the terrorist. I want you to look closely on the next slide. And I would like to argue that, of course, the calculus of a terrorist organization is totally different than the calculus of lone wolves. I'll give you now 4 pictures of 4 lone wolves that were arrested in Israel in the last 6 months, in the last wave of lone wolves attack. And I would ask you, what is the common denominator in all of those pictures? The common denominator is the smile on the face. And the smile on the face, in my view, represent the outcome of this cost-benefit analysis. This is a satisfaction smile. This is not a coincidence that they are smiling, because based on their calculus of costs and benefits, they actually fulfilled what they wanted to achieve. And therefore it was beneficial, although they are probably going now to be arrested for a lifetime, serve their time in jail, still they are smiling. When we are talking about the lone wolf attacks, there are different types of modus operandi that lone wolves are conducting: sabotage, stoning, Molotov cocktail, stabbing, running down, bulldozing, shooting, and IED bombing. By the way, I won't get into it, but suicide attacks, under the definition that we use for suicide attacks, are not being conducted by lone wolves. Anybody who wants to get understanding why, I'll explain in other place. I don't have the time for that. When I'm talking about this phenomenon of lone wolves, I use the term jihadi zombies. And I'll tell you why. Because those lone wolves, the satisfaction that they have on their face is that they believe that they achieve honor by conducting this type of an attack. And I want to refer them to the zombies phenomenon, which there is no honor that they can take out of it. And youngsters around the world do cling to the idea of what are the zombies and what need to be done with the zombies. I want to show you a short, actually a few pictures of a lone wolf attack that have conducted 800 meters away from this campus. And look at the person with the red shirt who's attacking innocent bystanders that are waiting in a public bus station. If this is not a jihadi zombie, then I don't know what's a jihadi zombie altogether. Now you would say, okay, this is an Israeli problem, but we are coming from different countries in the world. Well, jihadi zombies, unfortunately, we have today all over the world. One jihadi zombie was conducted an attack in the streets of London against Lee Rigby, a soldier that was butchered and decapitated in the street. Now this jihadi zombie didn't run away after he attacked it. Actually, he took his hands, covered that with the blood of the victim, and he was looking for every camera just to brag about what he did. That's a jihadi zombie. Now, it's not just in London. You want to see in New York City. This is another jihadi zombie, Zale Thompson, that converted to Islam, was radicalized via the internet, and at the end of the day, what he decides to do is to take an axe and to kill police officers. So I said that until now, until recently, we counterterrorism experts used to say that it's impossible to prevent jihadi zombies attacks, the personal initiative attacks, because we don't have any intelligence. But it changed. I can reveal to you that in the last 6 months, in the last wave of lone wolf attacks in Israel, we have found that in many cases, I cannot say if it's 30 or 40 or 50% of the cases, we had a warning before the attack occurred. And the address, the writing was on the wall. And I refer to the Facebook wall, of course. Ishaq Badaran conducted an attack on the 10th of October 15, and he bragged about his connection or his inspiration from ISIS when he was showing on his Facebook wall himself wearing a ring before the attack occurred. Fadi Alun wrote in his Facebook page, "In the name of Allah, merciful and compassionate. Oh Allah, today I decided to achieve shuhada, martyrdom, and the victory to Allah." What's more than that? That's a golden piece of intelligence for anyone who really wants to deal with it. And of course, what we see is that the internet is being used also in order to radicalize them, in order to teach them how to be effective in their lone wolf's attack, tutorial videos, how to stab, imams who's teaching how to stab, and then using the posters of them as model of imitation altogether. So I know I need to wrap up, and I want to give a good example of a person who's the first Israeli who's wrapping up at the right time. So I would wrap up with this slide. What we see today is that the internet is practically serving as the platform for the radicalization, starting with the terrorist organization that use the internet in order to send their insightful messages, to radicalize the terrorists. The terrorists are being, or the innocent people that turns to be terrorists later on, being radicalized by consuming this propaganda, the incitement, and they are being inspired by the terrorist organization. Then they decide to initiate the attack and plan how to conduct the attack. And this is most important. Then they go and justify the attack over the internet using the social networks, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on and so forth. They conduct the attack, and once they do that, they become an imitation of model. This process, which goes in a perpetuum mobile, becomes an epidemic phenomenon. What we see today globally, it's an epidemic phenomenon. The fact that we had the attack in Orlando is influencing, as we speak, other attackers in different parts of the world altogether. That's the bad news. The good news, and I always like to end with the good news is that this is transparent. And we, those who is dealing with counterterrorism, practically can monitor the process and can get a prior information. The question is, what do you do with this information? I would leave you with this question open. Thank you very much.
תודה רבה לפרופסור גנור.